hands on your knees and show some class, yeah. Why she looking at me though? Watch me get the pussy for free though. Step it up, take a shot like a free throw. Her girl on the side wanna see more. We don't tape shit, but we record. Give her 1 round, she want 3 more. I don't apologize just for remorse. Romanticized about the intercourse. Why she looking at me though? Watch me get the pussy for free though. Step it up, take a shot like a free throw. Her girl on the side wanna see more. We don't tape shit, but we record. Build up pressure to the big score. Put my money to her mouth, can she fit more? Problem with her nigga, he a big door. When she felt it in her hip, she made her reach for it. I ain't mad, little mama, muy bonito. Hablo Spaniel, muy poquito. Dance with me, let me feel on your tempo. Do it real fast, while she look at me though. Watch me get the pussy for free though. Step it up, take a shot like a free throw. Her girl on the side wanna see more. We don't tape shit, but we record. Give her 1 round, she want 3 more. I don't apologize for remorse. Romanticize about the intercourse. Bounce up and down with me. Bounce up and down with me. Shake it fast, stepping down, little bitch, like you laced with class. I got no problem with your man. I just came to dance. If I grab on your hips, don't fear the grass.
You are now tuned in to DameSmiff.
What is going on, y'all? It's your boy DameSmiff, and this morning we are actually going to be discussing the history of marching band and a bit of how students can actually take advantage of what they're learning and the resources they have when it comes to that level of their career. So if you guys are interested in that conversation, make sure you hit the like button. That way more people can know that this video is dope and they can get access to it. Also, hit the subscribe button so you can catch my latest videos and be on time for these streams, y'all. So how are you guys doing this morning? Let me know in the chat. But essentially, we're continuing this week's journey through helping the children out and understanding what it is that they need to be successful musicians into adulthood, right? So the biggest thing that you're going to have to focus on is whether or not you understand what these artists have access to and whether or not you agree with how they're utilizing what they're getting access to, right? So yesterday we looked at how colleges like Berkeley are partnering actually with AI companies, right? But they're also advertising for the AI companies through having the professors be employed to the companies or to these AI companies that are partnering with the colleges, right? And so what that does is it creates a kind of ecosystem for not only them to make money, but at the same time trying to figure out what's a priority. And that was an interesting thing to learn because it shifted the priority from learning how to make music to making music simpler, easier, smoother, I guess you could say. And so when we're considering that, we're going to look at the history of marching band and see how the United States actually was affected nationwide from this kind of musical shift and how it shaped what we look at as, I guess you can say, the career path of a music student today. Okay, so let's get started with our first clip so we can get you guys onto lunch like normal. And I want to see any kinds of questions you got in the chat, and I'll see if I can catch them in time and things like that. But let's get it.
In honor of National Marching Band Day on March 4th, here is a quick video about the history of marching band. 7 years ago. Okay, no.
So, looking at this photo, how many of you have been in marching band? How many of you know of the marching band? Maybe been a flag girl, majorette, band dancer, drum major, how many of you have actually been in the marching band? Well, I've been in the marching band, and it's actually pretty unique in terms of a career path for your musicianship, because you learn a lot of different things about what it is to be a musician very fast, right? And it's not so much in the sense of it being difficult, it's just that you have a lot of responsibility, right? So we're going to look at the different kinds of marching bands and stuff like that, but we're also going to take a look at like what the human inside the marching band that makes up the marching band student has to actually deal with.
No, just kidding. The year was 1842, and Notre Dame University had just been founded. The founder decided to create a band program, and this lives on as the oldest college band in continuous existence. It's often referred to as the oldest band in the land. But even before bands as we know them now came around, there were American military bands. The first recorded American military band is in 1756. It was known as the Regiment Artillery Company of Philadelphia, and it was led by Benjamin Franklin. These military bands played a key part in the Revolutionary War a few decades later to boost soldiers' morale. Their importance continued to show in the Civil War, and especially during World War I. General Pershing, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, was a strong believer in military bands and used them to maintain a positive relationship between America and France.
Okay, so that's actually interesting to point out here, is that the purpose of the military bands was actually to kind of like keep relationships and networks and kind of things like that working between nations and governments and cultures, right? So now when you're considering, well, let's say like the education for a college student to get into a marching band, what responsibility do you think you're giving them, right? Now, most of you, when you were in the marching band, you weren't in college to be in the marching band, right? It was usually like on a scholarship program, or maybe like we usually say you guys have a degree in something completely different that has nothing to do with music, yet you guys are in music classes and, playing instruments and things like that in a marching band. So when we're looking at the value of that role today, what does it really mean, right? And so for us, in terms of my generation, a lot of what we were doing in the marching band was more for entertainment and performance value. There was a big recruitment thing where we were getting a lot of music students to actually learn about getting into college and what college was, right? But outside of that, in terms of society and like bridging the gaps between governments and stuff like that, that wasn't really the big thing for a collegiate marching band, right? So in terms of translating that experience into information or resources for students, what do you guys think that means for you, right? And when you consider like what your experience in the marching band was, or what your experience was observing a marching band, how does that correlate? Like, how does that value make sense in your head?
War I. General Pershing, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, was a strong believer in military bands and used them to maintain a positive relationship between America and France. It's no surprise that the military used music because music has played an important role in society since even medieval times, with different musicians being of various prestige based on their class. The armed forces had strict uniform policies, and bands are still held to high standards today. Fortunately for us, uniforms have evolved quite a bit over time. However, some traditions have stayed, such as having a training camp or band camp, and also certain commands such as dressing center or coming to attention. Bands officially came to high schools when the veterans of World War I retired and became teachers. Around this time, it was proposed that students should receive credit for participating in the following classes.
Okay, so back then, when the veterans were, like they said, becoming teachers, how do you think they translated the value of what they were teaching the students, right? And what's the point, right? Because today, like we said, you could see a lot of scholarships. You see a lot of people using it as a stepping stone to get into a music career and all these kinds of things, right? But if it's tied to, let's say, your country's, I guess you can say, integrity, your country's honor, your country's agenda and things like that, how important is it for us to view this position today when it comes to our students?
Veterans of World War I retired and became teachers. Around this time, it was proposed that students should receive credit for participating in the following classes: drama, chorus, music, or band. But band did not receive any sort of priority in this. Actually, chorus and theater were proposed first. Band followed along later. Meanwhile, DCI had been founded in 1972. This doesn't seem like that long ago, but this is before the discovery of Pluto and before VHS tapes were widespread in homes. WGI followed shortly after in 1977 when 6 color guard leaders from around the nation joined to create national standards for guard. So why are some bands marching like this? This is what's known as a high step, one of a couple types of marching styles. The other popular marching style is the roll step. High schools mostly use the roll step, but the high step is popularized by HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, as well as the Big Ten, or the popular big public colleges.
So, when you guys have experienced marching bands, what was your favorite version, the roll step or the high step? A lot of times people usually correlate it to where they're from, their culture, and where their upbringing is. But fundamentally, the bands are very similar. It's just that they have a different way of approach to the music, right? So there would be instances where like a high step band can't play as intricately because of how much motion there is with the band. So their intricacies and their complexities are combined with the movements, or they stand independently most times. With the roll step bands, you usually see a combination of the two because there's a lot less turbulence while they're marching and things like that. Sometimes the roll step bands will have sheet music with them, and the high step bands will usually memorize a bit more. But usually, like she said, when it comes to it, you'll see it in like HBCUs and things like that. And it's very, very interesting when you're looking at students choose a marching band, because there's really a lot of things that can affect your decision, right? And we got to consider that whenever we're pushing students towards these kinds of things, because like if you look at healthcare or something like that, you will look at the history of, you know, the healthcare industry, being a doctor, being a nurse, and all the technology and cool stuff like that. But we don't really dive into the history of like why we do what we do when it comes to playing the trumpet, playing the baritone, or things like that. And so in the United States, as you can see, music wasn't a big thing for students across the nation until World War I, right? And that has to be a thing to point out, because then you have to figure out, well, how do we shape the education for music? How do we make sure we're getting the best out of this education in terms of, is it worth sending your kids into, you know, being a bandmate and stuff like that? And the other part of this is figuring out, how does this translate into relationships in other industries, right? So when we're looking at the schools today and how they're implementing AI and all that stuff, it really has little to do with this understanding of the musicianship, the process of making music, and the appreciation, I guess, you can have for that process. And so if we're teaching people to not participate more, we're teaching people to not really appreciate it more, then what's really going to happen when we think about the history of something like this? And we already can see the differences now in terms of the kinds of music the students are playing today. The approach to marching band today is completely different than it was in the 60s and 70s. But in terms of what we want, is this accurate, right? So let's take a look at one of the older schools that actually made a big impact in terms of the United States. And we're going to really look at it from the perspective of the musicians. So when we're looking at this, you got to remember the time that they're in, and we got to also remember the, I guess you can say, expectations of the music industry at the time, right? So what we're going to look at here is going to be Bowie State University. Now that's the school I attended, but the interesting thing about this is that this was the first HBCU. And you got to also consider it being the first HBCU. And then now we're going to look into how its marching band grew to where it became today, right? So for the musicians who walked its halls, the institution's evolution from a post-Civil War normal school into a modern university is a legacy written in rhythm, resilience, and reclaiming cultural narrative, right? So this is going to be important to understand because of the amount of work it took to change the school from what it began as to where it is today. but then considering how constant you have to be in terms of expectations for your musicians, right? So 1865, how many of you know what happened in 1865? Let me know in the comments if you know what happened. What was going on in that year, right? So from 1865 to 1910, the school story began there as the Baltimore Normal School for Colored Teachers, holding its first classes in the African Baptist Church. For the earliest musicians in this space, music was not an academic major. It was an inseparable part of faith, community preservation, and the oral tradition of a newly emancipated people. Okay, we'll pause right there. So how many of you relate music that deeply to your life today, right? And this is important to line up because what we're doing here this week is we're talking about the challenges young musicians have, but we're also laying the foundation for what it is that many young musicians are dealing with in reality, right? So a lot of us would think of a 5, 6, 7-year-old playing the piano, singing in church and things like that, and just think, oh, cute little baby. But what they're doing is they're joining a greater purpose, but at the same time, they're training themselves in a certain practice, right? And so for them, this was religious, this was academic, and this was also part of their community preservation because they were probably the few colored people who had access to this kind of teachings at the time, right? And someone said, yes, segregation ended, or slavery ended, right? And so the key thing here is that now you have a situation where you're going to have a untapped resource. And I want you to just pay attention to how they handle that resource and then compare it to how we handle it today in terms of streaming, in terms of how you guys are marketed to, right? And so singing in the African Baptist Church meant carrying forward tradition of spirituals, work songs, and coded messages of freedom. So this is a part, I'm gonna pause here to point out that this is the part of musicianship that I think a lot of musicians today do not like. I think we shy away from this, right? So singing in the church for them meant carrying forward tradition of spirituals, work songs, and coded messages of freedom, right? So if you fast forward to 2026, there's this whole thing where a lot of musicians believe that their lyrics shouldn't be held to themselves, like their personal beliefs and things like that. And I think this disconnect creates a lot of confusion when it comes to what you are actually doing with your music, okay? Now, I told you guys yesterday about how DJ Quick was talking about how 2-inch tape can capture the physicality and the true raw energy of sound waves and things like that versus digital. So I think the disconnect comes from the fact that most musicians today don't write music. Most musicians today don't perform their music, let alone perform it independently. Like they don't have to push a button for things to happen and they're lip syncing, right? But then at the same time, the music that they create is not tied to anything other than paying a bill, making money, making connections, or some kind of trendy moment, like whatever butt shaking dance is popular at the time, right? And so when I see this stuff and I point it out, like I said, this is the part that usually offends most musicians because it then sounds exactly like what I just said. Your music that you spent time, money, and effort creating sounds like you don't believe in it. And I can tell because I've done this for enough time to be able to tell. Now, if you asked me in high school, it would be harder to tell. Like we all believed, you know, NSYNC was like really about it. You know, we were kids, right? But as you get older, and then on top of getting older, you also participate in the creation process. You start to understand what it is that garners specific results, right? You can see musicians that not only are better at their craft, but understand the craft better. And so that's something you can learn from. But looking at what we're seeing here, in terms of the history of, let's say, marching band, and specifically the Bowie State Normal School, this situation is deeply tied to how you believe in what you're saying, what you're writing, and whether or not you should put it out. Now, that sets the foundation for the following. What is it you're going to put online? What is it you're going to brand yourself as? What is it you spend your time doing? Like this live stream has a hard time cutoff, right? I can't just spend time doing this, right? But that bleeds into the following: your health, what it is that you think about, what it is that actually propels you forward and gets you out of the bed in the day. Is it really just because it's the sun up, or do you have something bigger than yourself that's actually pushing you forward, right? And so for these musicians, it was about singing, spiritual songs. Back then, they didn't really have radio, streaming, and iPhone. So if you wanted to hear a song that was going to uplift you in a sad moment, you had to know how to sing it or have heard it before, because if you didn't know how to read sheet music, there was really nobody coming to play the song for you, right? So there's that. And then there's also the coded messages of freedom, where they had to speak to other people who may not have been directly connected to what they were doing, but maybe they knew a few words. Maybe they couldn't read, but they could like understand the language and stuff like that. So there's a lot of depth to why people were making music. That's the point here. There's a lot of depth to why people were preserving music and looked at it as valuable for everyone else around them, bigger than their own personal agenda. And like I said, this is difficult for many musicians today to really grasp and understand, because you usually sell to young musicians, you're going to get rich, you're going to get the car, you're going to get the girl. Or for women, it's usually like you're going to be known as the greatest or the prettiest, or, you're going to get lots of money. And it creates a disconnect between how they're creating their music, which makes something like Suno or AI music easier to digest. It makes it way more comfortable for you to look at. You don't really see a problem with it anymore. And so now that we've bridged that gap, we're going to continue moving on, and then we're going to learn a bit more about the normal school here. And it says, when the school formalized, hold on one second. It says, when the school formalized its curriculum to train Black teachers, music was viewed as a vital pedagogical, I hope I said that right. Pedagogical, how do you say this? I'm actually, let's see how I say this, because I want to say it right. Pedagogical. It's a funny word, but it says it was a pedagogical tool. Teachers in training learned standard hymns and folk songs because upon graduation, they were expected to go into underfunded rural communities and use song to manage classrooms, teach reading, and build community cohesion. So actually, at this time, they were using music as a way to teach. They weren't necessarily using music for any other reason other than to educate and grow their community and, build up what it is that they're trying to do, right? So now that we are understanding the depths that they're willing to go through in terms of teaching their community through music, how do you guys view students that go into music school or try to at least get better at their instrument through lessons and stuff like that, right? So let's see how it moved to Bowie, Maryland, and what happened in the industrial era. So in 1910, the school relocated to a rural 187-acre tract in Prince George's County known as Jericho Farm, becoming Maryland Normal and Industrial School at Bowie. For musicians during this period, life was defined by the rigorous intersection of classical education, agricultural labor, and industrial training. So not only were you a musician, you were learning how to farm, probably be a carpenter, engineer, metalwork and all that other stuff in terms of like whatever was needed in rural Maryland, right? I'm pretty sure you weren't doing like welding and shit, but that's actually pretty interesting. So you had to be a completely different, well-rounded musician. Whereas when I was going to school, it was really a lot of desk work, a lot of computer work. The physicality of it was just walking across campus, really. You just had to make sure you didn't eat too much and stay active. They had like a gym and fitness centers and stuff like that, but yeah, it was nowhere near as physical of a job. Now, marching band, certain organizations in the college made it very physical. Like marching band was super physical. Of course, if you played a sport, track, football, all that stuff, bowling, we had a great bowling team. If you were and in any of that, you were being super physical. But outside of that, college is nowhere near as like you got to learn agriculture. You got to learn how to like, fix things and stuff like that. That was not the key thing, right? So it says students literally built the campus and worked the fields to harvest their own food. The musical soundtrack of this era was shaped by group singing during manual labor and chapel services that bookended grueling days. So could you imagine going to school, right? And you and your friends, homies, and peers and stuff like that, when y'all get hungry, you got to go tend the garden. You got to go, check on the livestock and things like that. And then at the same time, if you guys wanted to hear your jams, you wanted to put your earbuds in while you work, y'all had to sing. You had to sing to do it. And then at the end of the day, there was no they had hangouts and stuff like that, but there was no real schoolyard for you to just go hang out at. It was the chapel, right? Because y'all had a deeper purpose for being there. Even while focusing on agriculture and trades, the choral tradition deepened. Music served as the emotional relief valve for students navigating the rigid, segregated realities of the 20th century Maryland. Musicians held tight to spirituals while beginning to engage more deeply with Western classical choral structures. Because you gotta remember, these are African slaves at this point. Like they have a completely different culture than Black culture as we see it today, right? Their Black culture is tied to the Baptist church more so than today's more secular American freedom 1990s kind of culture. Yo, what up? What is it, my man's type of culture? It wasn't that then. So it was very modest, very they actually took their time in terms of like considering their decisions as far as how they're going to represent themselves, right? It wasn't I'm just going to head out to the store real quick. It was a completely different culture. So let's move on to the Teachers College, the liberal arts transition, which happened in 1935 to 1988, and the classical foundation and soundtrack changes. So as the institution became Maryland Teachers College at Bowie in 1935, and later became Bowie State College in 1963, the musical landscape shifted dramatically. Music moved from a supportive tool for general education to a formalized discipline of artistic excellence. This era saw the establishment of formal music proficiencies. Every graduating music educator or performer was expected to master music theory, ear training, and piano proficiency. Musicians were grounded in a dual identity, mastering the Western classical canon from Baroque to modernism, while fiercely protecting and analyzing the rich legacy of African American classical music and spirituals. So they had a lot of work ahead of them as far as competing with other schools, competing with other countries. But as far as, setting the standard for future students at their school, right? This is why when I talk to musicians a lot of time, this personal branding conversation has to be focused around musicianship. And then anything else outside of that can't be important, because what's going to happen is you're going to have conversations like some of the ones I've been having the last couple of weeks with people where we're talking about like specific players, specific teachers and educators in the industry, specific executives and things like that, specific technologies and stuff like that. It goes deeper than what it is you're working on in your studio. And so when you start having those conversations, then you start to have to think about, well, what am I going to be dedicating my time to, right? And so like I could have spent the past 2-3 months just dumping out a bunch of music, but it actually is more beneficial to do this kind of program to educate the public, because there really is nothing like this, right? And so when you notice those kinds of things, you start to move differently. And that's what I'm noticing here by 1963, when they started to actually bring a little bit more of a formalized education to everything, right? So now we're going to go to the Anthem of Identity. Passing standard arrangements of traditional pieces became a rite of passage. Musicians were required to flawlessly execute both the national anthem and Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black national anthem. This requirement reflected a deep socio-political consciousness, ensuring that Bowie State University musicians understood their craft as an expression of cultural identity and civil rights. And interesting enough, that was one of the pieces we had to learn in the marching band at Bowie State University. And when I joined, it actually became the Symphony of Soul. And we were actually just getting into like the digital landscape. And I think by the time I left, they had just started really upgrading and going into a whole new, upgraded version of the music program, the music facilities and stuff like that. So I got to see a taste of it as like a brand new facility and stuff. So it was pretty cool. So now the band at Bowie State University is called the Symphony of Soul. So today, Bowie State University stands as a powerhouse of diverse musical expression. From a musician's perspective, the campus is a living laboratory where traditional performance meets high-tech industry standard workflows. A massive pillar of Bowie State University's modern musical identity is the Symphony of Soul. For an instrumentalist in the Symphony of Soul, music is an athletic, yes, it was very athletic, high-stakes discipline. The Drumline has achieved elite recognition, yes, they are an elite drumline, ranking among the top 10 across HBCUs. And the band has performed on global stages, including NFL season openers alongside icons like Aretha Franklin. And the repertoire fuses complex jazz harmonies, driving HBCU field style percussion and contemporary urban charts. So we played a lot of like radio hits. At the time when I was out, it was like Katy Perry, Neo, Beyonce was really popular at the time. So we played a lot of that stuff. And when you think about songs like Love on Top, like the modulations and key changes that happens in there and stuff, like there was a lot of demanding music going on either way. And then they also had the jazz band and the orchestra, and they all had very demanding, complex music there too. So it was no breaks at all. So by the time I left, they were actually just released the Fine and Performing Arts Center, and I actually got to spend I think a few months in there before I officially left. And so the opening of the $71 million, 123,000 square foot Fine and Performing Arts Center marked a massive technological leap forward. Vocal and instrumental performance majors command state-of-the-art recital halls. Yes, everything was crispy clean, best digital audio workstations. The studios we saw in Atlantic Studios, it rivaled a bit of that. It had like an amphitheater inside it. It was amazing, or a recital hall. And it focused on rigorous juries, senior recitals. Some people had some really good recitals when I was seeing them, and multilingual vocal delivery or virtuosic instrumental execution. The music's technology concentration reflected on the revolution of the modern music industry. Bowie State University became a hub for digital creators. Musicians here view a Mac Mini M1 running Logic Pro or advanced hardware mixers just as an earlier generation viewed the piano. So today they're using Mac Mini M1s, and I'm lucky to have one because I actually stayed up on top of like what was the best technology and stuff like that for a long time. That was the biggest thing. And I made the investment to get my hands on a Mac Mini. So I'm technically running the same thing my school would be running at a state-of-the-art level. Now I just don't have the education, teachers, and resources, so I just got to catch up on that curve. But the point is that they're understanding technology and they're understanding how to organize and get their students the resources they need to continue doing the very thing that they've set a foundation for, right? And I'm pretty sure they still play like Lift Every Voice, and they still have a good marching band program. But I just want you guys to see how the shift is going from where it began to where it's going to be, and then what expectations do we have going forward, right? So it also says while they're working in there, digital musicians get to work on MIDI sequencing, synthesis, and analog digital sound properties, commercial arranging, jingle writing, film scoring, the complex legalities of copyright law, artist management, and streaming distribution platforms, right? And a lot of the teachers there have actual practice in it. That was the one thing I thought was pretty cool. Like I don't think I've met a teacher that didn't actually write, perform, or actually publish anything. I think most, if not all of them, were definitely in the industry at the same time. But there's also a legacy of artists that come from Bowie State University. The perspective of Bowie State University musicians is perhaps best reflected in its alumni and past attendees who have shaped global culture. The halls have been walked by multi-Grammy winning R&B royalty like Toni Braxton and her sisters, hip-hop chart toppers like Wale, and boundary-breaking theater innovators like Miles Frost, who won a Tony Award for his portrayal of Michael Jackson on Broadway. That's actually pretty cool because portraying Michael Jackson is already very, very, very tough. But from the acoustics of a historic Baltimore church to the cutting-edge recording bays of a modern campus, musicians have always been the heartbeat of Bowie State, translating the school's historical endurance into living, evolving soundtrack. So, when we're looking at the history of this stuff, we have to really keep in mind what purpose we have laid in front of us to make sure we're on track, right? That's kind of why I wanted to do this one, because when we're considering working with young musicians, we can look at a young musician and they can tell us to their face what they want from the music industry. But then we have to be responsible enough to say yay or nay on whether or not we're going to give that to them, right? And it would only be fair if we inform them of that, right? And that's why I tell a lot of parents that we're talking to, because I used to work in sales for like young music students who needed to like buy and rent music instruments. And so a lot of parents were trying to figure out like, why would my kid want to play the violin? What is the point? Like maybe they're not musicians, so they don't really see it yet. And what I had to tell them was that what your kid is interested in is more so themselves right now. So they're going to do things like play the trumpet for 2 years and then put it down because they saw their friend play soccer and now they want to go play soccer. So ideally what you should be trying to push your kids towards, or at least young musicians, they could be teenagers, but what you should be pushing them towards is the utility of music. Understanding that there's a purpose to singing, there's a purpose to playing an instrument, because then they'll tie it to how they feel about that purpose more so, and then they'll make a decision that way. But just because you put your kid in front of a piano and they get good at it doesn't really mean anything if we have, certain expectations of them or if they're on a certain path, right? So that was a very interesting deep dive down into the history of marching band, and a lot of it that we're going to consider when we look at college and music and stuff going forward on this channel is usually going to be centered around musicians. But this is one of the things that I like to point out with college bands. The level of distraction that comes with just being at a general university, like the bands that are usually the popular bands are just general university. Like Florida A&M is an agriculture school, right? So if you're going there to play like in a marching band scholarship, just understand the purpose of the school is an agriculture school. Like that's the point, right? Southern University, these are universities. Like you have to have, certain goals that come with it. And I'm saying this to say that is why you will be playing alongside people that may have like a biology degree and not a music technology degree. And so if you don't know that, or if you think you're doing that, you can wind up wasting a lot of time as far as not learning what you need to learn. For me, it was all about being an independent musician. So a lot of the skills that I learned from attending Bowie State, I still use today. I've actually grown upon and actually applied and practiced, right? Whereas there's other people who were right alongside me and it was like their focus wasn't to be a musician. So the time was spent being a musician for the sake of doing something else, right? And so it's not that we didn't align, it's just that we didn't align. So let us move on to the next clip here, and then we will continue learning about how we can help the children this week.
If we think about this for a minute, these instruments are often instruments that we're going to be keeping for a very long period of time. Perhaps it'll be the last new instrument that you ever purchase. And if that's the case, you want a manufacturer who's going to support you with repair parts and replacement parts for a very long period of time.
So this is similar to the job I was talking about I had where we had to sell and rent instruments to young musicians. And what he's saying here is that the instrument that you get, just like the school you choose to go to, as well as choosing to be a musician, kind of sets the foundation for what it is that you're doing, right? So we could easily just put a trumpet in your hand, but there's a certain kind of trumpet you need to have, and there's a certain, let's say, response you get from certain trumpets depending on how and what you're playing on, right? So this level of intricacy you can learn through going through a music school, because so many people would know this information, and then you would be readily available and immersed in applying and practicing this information. But on the other hand, if you don't have this, it can be very, very, very confusing, daunting, and like, whoa, who wants to care about that kind of stuff? Like, ask a guitar player how to take care of a guitar, and they will sit you down with like the most stoic look on their face and then begin explaining life journey style metaphors about how to clean a guitar, right? And it's not that it's something they're really passionate about. It's just like taking care of a car. It takes effort. It takes patience. Just like taking care of your body, it takes effort. It takes patience, right? And so what he's explaining here is that you want to find instruments that kind of have access to a good manufacturer. So like Bell, you have Yamaha is always good. Khan is always good. There's a lot of companies out there, right? You can think about electronics. Like I have a MIDI board in front of me. I'm trying to figure out what other things. There's cables and things you got to worry about. So all of these little intricacies, as an individual musician, you're constantly thinking about. Like it's a stressful thing, honestly, throughout the day, because you're thinking about like, okay, if I use this software, can I do what I need to do? Can I just maintain it? Can I keep it? We looked at Capitol Records, and they were talking about how they keep everything. They don't sell anything at all, right? But there's a reason for it. There's a foundation to why they do it. And this video is going to help us understand it from the instrumentalist's perspective, just understanding what it is to have the instrument, right? Again, very important to understand if you want to go to music school, if you want to be a musician, if you want to actually communicate and collaborate with musicians.
So this is when doing a little bit of research on your brand is important. And while we're on the discussion of brands, I think it's also important to talk about where we buy an instrument. There's a lot of choices available, and obviously this is maybe a little bit self-serving as we are a retailer. But questions to ask yourself are, can I try the instrument that I'm going to buy before I purchase it? Okay? Is service available to me locally by someone I trust? And then what are the pre-delivery and post-delivery benefits of dealing with the person that I'm going to purchase this instrument from? Has it been inspected and set up and looked over for quality and manufacturer defects before you receive it, so that you know that when you get it in your hands, it is perfect? And then similarly, after you go through the break-in period on your instrument, is that company going to take it back and service it for you and make sure that everything is perfect for you going forward?
So how many of you knew that your instrument has a break-in period, like your sneakers or like your jeans and stuff like that? Some people say cars have break-in periods, right? And what it is that you're going to have to figure out the instrument. You're going to have to learn it, and it's going to have to, quote unquote, open up for you as far as react positively to what you're doing to it. I don't know how to explain it scientifically, but it's usually something that people kind of understand when you relate it to like new shoes, right? Your shoes kind of like morph to the way you walk and your foot and things like that, right? Now, I can't explain it with a brass instrument or maybe like a woodwind or things like that, but this period that he's talking about is that chunk of time that I was explaining to a lot of parents that doesn't serve a selfish musician. That period of time is one where the musician is just like, I need to break this thing in, and I want to break this thing in. And when they can, it serves them a lot more, right? What he's about to explain is really how you can look at this and really manage this from an independent musician's level to get the best results, right? Because a lot of us will just go to like thrift stores, we'll just pick up a dinged up whatever and then think we could just clean it up and stuff. But again, when we talked about the price of a elite music education, we're looking at about $100,000 a year just to get into the access of the education, right? So what kind of instrument do you think you should be bringing to school? Now, a lot of you will be thinking, well, I need a really, really nice instrument. It's got to be super expensive. That's not necessarily the point I'm saying here. But the point that we're really focusing on is that you need to understand your instrument to that point.
These are things to consider. Let's take a second and let's talk about the appearance of new musical instruments, okay? Some of them are really super attractive, and I am personally drawn to these instruments. They have such a stunning visual appeal that they make me want to play them, okay? That's all part of the package of getting a step up a professional instrument, but we need to be careful. We need to be careful that we're buying with our ears and not with our eyes.
So how many of you, let me know in the chat, know what a step up instrument is? And for many of you who probably have been an independent musician for a long time, you still might not know what a step up instrument is. And also, can you tell what a step up instrument is?
Okay, there are a lot of things that folks coming in looking for a step up a professional instrument tell me that they want to have. Sometimes they'll come in, especially on trumpets, and they'll say, I want to have a silver-plated trumpet. And I'll ask the question, why do you want to have a silver-plated trumpet? If you remember our discussion about materials, there are specific sonic reasons to have a silver-plated trumpet. That said, certainly not everyone who's a professional trumpet player plays or uses a silver-plated instrument. Look at great players like Wynton Marsalis or Arturo Sandoval or Bobby Shew. None of them.
Now, it goes down to the brass it uses, the mouthpiece, the brass the mouthpiece is made of. It can get very intricate.
Most players use an instrument that's silver-plated. They get great tone. So that's a perfect instance of let's buy with our ears, not with our eyes. A couple of things to consider is really in vogue right now to have an instrument with a matte finish, especially on saxophones. Some of these matte finished instruments are lacquered, some of them are not. As you recall from our discussions earlier, the lacquer makes a big difference, but the matte finish on the instrument is primarily something that adds visual appeal. Also, there's a lot of choices now revolving around lacquers. It used to be that we would just put clear or gold lacquer on instruments. Now we have all different color choices, which is exciting, and it allows you to kind of take a more personal take on your professional instrument.
I've seen some people play at like Christmas concerts with red lacquered trumpets and saxophones and stuff. It's all pretty cool and unique, but he's kind of showing you that the musician is not looking at that. Those are attractive things, kind of like when we look at these new cars today, and the things we usually look at is like, can I connect my phone to Bluetooth? Does it have tents and stuff like that? Can I, do GPS and satellite radio? But then when you look deeper, most people are looking at like miles per gallon, how strong is the engine, how many horsepowers are in there, the tires and stuff like that. Can I, like you said, can I get manufacturing at a reasonable rate, or get access to manufacturing and repairs reasonably and stuff like that? Like, drivers look at that, but most people look at just, is it colorful, does it go fast and stuff like that.
That said, keep in mind that if you get an instrument with a special colored lacquer on it, if you ever do put a dent in it or need repair, getting that instrument to look like new again is going to be expensive, and in some cases not even possible. So we should focus on how the instrument feels to us when we play it and how it sounds first, and then how it looks. The last thing I'd kind of like to discuss with you today are some tips and tricks on auditioning an instrument. As I mentioned earlier, it is extremely important, in my view, to audition an instrument before you purchase it. Don't take someone else's word that it's good for you. Only you will know if it's good for you. So when you come to audition an instrument, the first thing I would recommend is to bring a mouthpiece, or if in the case of a woodwind player, a mouthpiece reed and ligature setup, and in case of a string player, a bow that you're comfortable with. Okay? What we want to do is we want to remove as many variables as we can so that we're just auditioning the actual instrument. So playing on your regular mouthpiece or bow setup I think is important in evaluating the instrument only. We can always audition mouthpieces, ligatures, reeds, and bows separately, okay? I also think it's important to play through your normal warm-up routine as a part of auditioning the instrument. I see many students and even adults and even professionals come in to audition an instrument, and they go into a practice room, put the instrument on their face or under their chin, and just start playing without going through their warm-up routine. I think if you want good results, warm up, long tones, right? And then it's important that you play a variety of styles. Play legato, play staccato, play fast, play slowly, okay? Don't necessarily come in with one particular piece of music and just play that back to back to back and say, okay, now I've evaluated these instruments. Really give them a chance. Try to reach both the apex in terms of volume that you can get out of an instrument and the least volume you can get out of an instrument and still produce a pure tone.
And that's really what he's talking about as far as breaking in an instrument. Sometimes some instruments, they resist vibrating after a certain volume or a certain tone and frequency and stuff like that. And so having something that's easily malleable, as far as like you can push a little bit of air into the brass and still get a good tone quietly. You can vibrate the strings on your bow and it still gets a very, very good clean tone. These things are very important for elite musicians because when you get in the studio, you can hear all of that stuff. When you get in front of the orchestra and on these mics and stuff on stage, you can hear all of that stuff.
Okay, this is going to help you evaluate the instrument well. And the last thing I would say about it is take your time. Take your time and don't be afraid to compare it to the instrument that you're currently playing. Play instruments back to back. If you have narrowed down choices to maybe 2 different instruments, then take time and audition those 2 different instruments again back to back. And if you notice yourself getting tired during the process of auditioning the instrument, then it's okay to stop, take a break, or even come back and audition the instruments on another day. I think these are, in some cases, small things, but they will help you to choose the best instrument for you. And in the end, this is what we want through all of these things. We don't want the brand that someone else wants for you. We want the brand that you want. We don't want the appearance to outweigh the playing experience and the sound of the instrument. And we want to make sure that we have done everything we can to know that the way the instrument plays and sounds in your hands is going to make you happy well into the future.
And I think a lot of people have a hard time really considering that that's what musicians are actually dealing with on top of, you know, like I said, the life stuff. Imagine going to the normal school right after slavery ended and you have to maintain your trumpet or your organ or your piano or even your voice sometimes, and you got to do agriculture work and you're dealing with, you know, life politics and family and culture and things like that. So let us move on to the last clip, and we're going to actually take a look at something that's going to help us really break down how music in schools have changed a lot, or teaching music in schools have changed a lot. So if we consider where they were from holding up religious traditions, hymns, agriculture work alongside of having to sing and things like that, high step and marching band, and then the amount of, let's say, attention to detail that comes with being in a marching band as far as instrument maintenance, which is similar to a weapon now, as far as like how in-depth the maintenance can go, and then how in-depth you have to be about the tasks and responsibilities you have in a marching band compared to what you have to do today. Now, you can remove marching band and talk about just learning digital music creation at all, but digital music creation really wouldn't have been a thing without real performers, real instrumentalists and singers and things like that. And when I say real, I mean as far as like physical, tangible, non-digital musicians and things like that. That shaped the foundation, which really came through religion and culture, to see what we have access to today. So when you see a lot of musicians reject religion and American culture as far as being an American musician, just keep that in mind, that they're rejecting literally the foundation of the industry that they want to participate in. But now we're going to look at it from today's perspective, and how are students navigating it today, going to school as musicians.
So let's see what you come up with here. COVID-19 presented us with numerous challenges.
I was in a lesson with one of my teachers. They tried to count off a song and there was lag. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4. So every time they were counting off the song, I wasn't playing in time with their snaps. And it took us a solid 5 minutes before we realized, okay, we have to go in a different direction with this.
We came up with a lot of really creative solutions to our conditions. For example, the recital is a typical part of many of our students' experience, so we decided to convert our recitals into recording projects. We hired a trio Kate, which is comprised of 2 alumni that we knew would be able to play at a world-class level in a recording, would be able to work with students and guide them through the process and help them with the production of their tracks.
The guitar student has to write all the songs, write all of the charts out, record demos for all of their songs, and then send them to all the other musicians that would be in the band on the recital. And the truth is, that's really how it is in the real world.
This is exactly how my jazz band that I played in, Just Us, Just Listen, did a lot of our tracks. It would be, we would all write our parts, and then we'd come together to put it into sheet music, and then we'd rehearse all the parts by reading the sheet music together, recording it all together, and then we'd make the song recording engineered and mastered and all that stuff afterwards, and then we'd split all the publishing and stuff like that. That's exactly how we did it. And like you said, it's the real world. When we started collaborating with other artists, you could see the stark difference between how us as 5 collegiate level musicians were light years ahead of people that just wanted to get in the game. Like, they just wanted to sing because they sang at church. And it was like, okay, well, here's the list of things you got to now think about. And they were like, too hard, too difficult. I don't want to do it. And that's why, to kind of like parallel this to our previous conversations, that's why it's easy for record labels to sign you guys and easy to get you guys into contracts, because you're not willing to do this and to learn this information or take this much effort. So they're actually doing a really good job as far as forcing the student to learn how to write, read, collaborate, and master the technology at the same time. So now you won't have any excuse when you get into a band or get in front of a band by saying, oh, I can't do something. Oh, I don't understand something. So that's actually a really cool approach.
A lot of music professionals have studios, as I have in my home here, where we work and record individually.
Remote recording isn't new, and it's certainly not going away. And so being able to work with other musicians and producers in this way is really an important skill to understand.
It's not like the 60s with this room full of musicians and we're all there like hanging out, like making music together at the same time in the same room. A lot of it happens like piecemeal. The guitar player would send their track only to the drummer, and then the drummer records his drum part and sends it back, and then that guy puts it together and then sends it over to the bass player. Through the magic of technology, it in the end sounds like we're just there playing together at the same time, which is pretty neat. You really need to learn how to engineer yourself, learn how microphones work, learn how recording software works. There's so many things that go into it.
So how many of you look at this screen and think you can't do nothing on here? This screen right here, this one right here. Like, what I'm seeing are waveforms. You got to understand that those waveforms are peaking there. That looks like a percussive instrument, probably like a snare. There's actually a left and right signal. On the left of this waveform, you can see how you have to pan it. You also can see the volume. Yeah, you can see the decibels and the volume and things like that. Up top, I see the transporter, and I can see how there's a whole bunch of editing tools and things like that. Like, how many of y'all look at this information and think, I don't know how to make music from this? Like, how many of you can plug in a MIDI board and make an album from this, make a career from this, right? I spent most of my time when I was going to Bowie State doing this, just learning this. I was learning the French horn and playing the brass and the marching steps and all that stuff. But this was something that I could not have a conversation with many musicians with because they were not willing. You can't have this conversation with your friends because they're not willing. Your girlfriend's not going to look at this and say, oh, let me understand how you're learning this and then help you and assist you. No one is trying to help you do this, right? So that's why it's important that they're highlighting that you do need to learn microphones. You do need to learn engineering. And you do need to make sure you understand how this works with other musicians, which means you got to bridge the gap between their understanding, which is why I said it's very difficult to have this conversation. A lot of musicians, like, you could be sitting with another musician that is a peer to you, will look at this screen and then walk away because it's difficult. However difficult it is difficult. Like, you have to actually apply some effort to learn how this software works in order to honestly participate in the music industry. If you don't know how to do this, you're a caveman. You're a Neanderthal. You know, there was a viral video of Kanye West spazzing out because somebody didn't know how to make a PDF. And I kind of feel him on that one, because it's like at a certain point, you have to pursue this knowledge so you can know what to do. And if you don't do it, you won't know. And so it's a very weird thing. But like I said, it's a resistant conversation you usually are having with musicians. It's a tough one. So as they're having this conversation, I just want you to remember, we started this week off to help the children. So when the children get into college, you're expecting to pay $100,000, around $100,000 a year, for them to attend college to learn this type of stuff. You can learn it on your own, but the point is that you can get a direct, laser focused, specialized education with that money. Now, what results do you want your student or child to get from this kind of education?
Online education greatly helped my career. I have the tools now going forward to help improve my mixes, my remote tracking. The day of graduation, I got a phone call and he said, "Hey, I need some guitars and bass recorded. Will you do this for me?" I recorded from my bedroom in Hollywood with the Budapest Orchestra for a Korean TV show. If you asked me to do that 3 months ago, I would be stressing and I'd be calling a lot of people and be like, what do I do? And now it was like, okay, I can bust it out, no problem.
Yep, and that was kind of the thing that bridged the gap between a lot of musicians, even before COVID. Like when people were using Fruity Loops, SoundCloud, Reason, Sibelius and stuff like that. Like, yeah, we were sending files, all kinds of stuff. Probably before that, like Napster and all that stuff. There were probably older bands doing that. Now, like you said, you would look at this and be like, whoa, what is going on? Like the knobs and stuff. I'm looking at all the colors and oh shit, what am I doing? Right? But as you start to develop what they call a workflow, a kind of process, you'll understand the program. But you'll have to, again, keep up with the demands of other people if you want to collaborate. Like if he's going to be working with, I think he said the Korean orchestra or something like that, he's got to know how to record so they can use the files, right? If he sent them crappy files, then he wouldn't get hired. So that has nothing to do with how well he plays his instrument, though. So that's the key thing about the education that you're paying for and the foundation you're laying for young musicians, right? There was nobody, I'll give you an example. There was nobody in my dorm sitting me down saying, you need to learn Logic. You need to learn Fruity Loops. You have an album coming. When is your music dropping? Like nobody was telling me to do that. I was self-motivated for all those years, right? I just want you to understand that when you consider how many other musicians want the results of knowing this information, but they're not self-motivated. And that's why it was important to look at the history of marching band and to see how it was tied to wartime, which gave you a very, very, really good reason to do what you're doing. And then it was also tied to religion and culture, which gives you a really good reason to do what you're doing. So if you remove those two things, like I said, if your artists today are rejecting these things, then you can see why it is difficult for them to find success, because they're not understanding what it is that gives them driving, passionate purpose in doing what they're doing every day. And that's something that you honestly cannot teach. You can't teach that. It's almost got to be like embedded in you, which comes from probably your great grandparents.
Those who are able to be flexible and see possibilities and opportunities rather than restrictions and obstacles will find interesting and creative paths forward. And
so now that we've seen that process, how many of you now look at what Suno is doing at Berklee a little bit differently now? Like imagine you ask a drummer for them to do your drum part and they send you an AI version of the sheet music you sent them instead of them getting down and playing it for you, right? You see how now the value of this $100,000 year tuition starts to look a little different now. It starts to sit a little awkwardly with you in terms of how it all lays, right? And so most of what we're going to be having conversations about this week are going to be around the children, like I said. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here because this is pretty much the best way to end this stream today. This was an amazing stream this morning. But For those of you who want to catch the restream, make sure you leave in the comments any answers to the questions I've asked today. But I also want to know, if you went to college, drop your marching band in there. What's your marching band name? What instrument did you play? And also, what year was it that you attended? That'd be pretty dope. But I will see you guys next time. This is Musician Talks with DameSmiff. We went over the history of marching band, went over the history of my school, and then at the same time, we got to learn a little bit of why musicians are learning music in